Weaver. I'm the executive director of the Bike Coalition. And I put this together based on a lot of things. One, I am a first responder, and I have been hit, you know, by cars twice in my life. I have been on scene when someone else was hit. I have sat in hospitals and courtrooms with people who have been injured in some kind of incident or their family members. And I get phone calls all the time from people who have had some kind of incident and want to know, well, what can they do now? And I hear some pretty heartbreaking stories and thought, well, a little bit of preparation and stuff ahead of time can make something be not as bad maybe as it had to have been otherwise. So I wanted to put together a session to talk about these things. There's also some resources I've collected that I'm going to be posting on our website along with the video of this, so that folks will have those resources. So when I mention something, you don't have to worry about, we're writing it down right away, because it will be captured for you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oh, actually, no, I'm not going to share my screen yet. I thought we would start with a little poll to get a sense of who's here and what your experiences have been. So I'm going to launch a poll that asks some questions, and you will have about a minute to check all that apply. Can you all see a little poll in front of you now? Somebody give me a thumbs up. Or a thumbs down. Okay, so go ahead and okay, there's a couple people yet who haven't answered yet. And this is anonymous. No one will see who said what. We'll just get the little chart, the aggregate. Okay. Oh, someone says none of them applied to me. Okay, then that's I should have put in a none of them apply button, but let's go ahead and see the results. And do you see the chart in front of you? Now, see, I can't. It's interesting what I'm allowed to see and what you're not allowed to see. So I hope that this shows up in the recording. So 40% of you have been hit by a car. 80% have had some other kind of crash or medical incident, like, well, you know, haven't all of us fallen off at some point for reasons, stupid or not. I have been on the scene when someone else had a collision or crash or incident, 90% of us. And then 50% of us have had a family or friend who has been hit by a car. So this is something that, you know, is not unusual. One of the things that I wanted that I should look up at some point are what those numbers are if I'd ask the same question around car crashes, right? How many of us have either been in some kind of collision in a car or know somebody who has or have witnessed one? And I suspect that the numbers would be just as high or even higher. Because I know folks will say, oh, isn't riding a bike, you know, more risky than driving in a car? And, you know, this person I know who got hit, it's like, yeah, and how many people do you know who have had some kind of crash in their car? And I think a lot of us have. Nonetheless, knowing what to do, both before we go out for a ride and if something happens, will have a lot to do with what might happen afterwards. So what can we do ahead of time to reduce the risks, the chances of having some kind of crash? And what can we do immediately after and following that to hopefully have better outcomes, both in the financial, medical, and legal realms. One thing this isn't going to be, so things we can do to, lower our chances of a collision, is a whole another, class of our whole smart cycling of, be lit if you're at night, wear the right clothes, follow the rules, be visible, be consistent and predictable, and all of those things that probably all of us have had at some point in our cycling life. And we're not going to, go over all of that today, except for one thing that I will point out. And one of the folks who I'm going to have share a story in a little bit will probably have something to say about that one, is the following the rules of the road. Even if a vehicle that hits one of us is breaking some law or another, if we on our bike are breaking one of the rules, what tends to happen is we get blamed, right? So your chances of having a good outcome in terms of dealing with law enforcement and legal system and insurance and all of that stuff is way worse if you were riding on the wrong side of the road or, doing something else that does not follow the vehicle code. Now, of course, sometimes some law enforcement don't really know all the details of the vehicle code and will accuse us of doing something illegal when we're actually not. But the more that we are following all of those safety guidelines, we're likely to have a better outcome if something does happen than if we were doing something, regardless of what the driver or whoever else was involved did. So I would like to start because I think stories are very powerful. And actually, this particular story is kind of what, and the aftermath and the conversations are part of what led me to put this session together. So I think I did see that you are here now, Doug. So I'm gonna let you go ahead and share your story with us.
Okay. I'm Doug Mckenzie. I've been riding in Sonoma County. I moved here in '79, and one reason why I'm still here in this county is the cycling is so great, as we all know. So I try to get out, every day. I'm in Northwest Santa Rosa, so I go out on those roads out there. And I was doing one of my standard loops. I call it the Vine Hill Loop. Go out to, Slusser to Marquis Station. And I'm going along Marquis Station, and if you're familiar with it, rolls along, and then there's a slight downhill with a couple of S turns down there. And when I go down those S turns, I can always go faster than if there's any traffic. So what I did this time was I was coming up to that downhill section. I turned around and I saw a vehicle there, and I decided I should go for it, because if I let them go, I'll be, they'll be holding me up. Basically, was my thought. So I do that. I get down to the bottom, and I'm rolling along on the flat, and I'm like, that guy should be going around me now. And that's the last thing I remember. That's it. Bang. Just out. I don't know. Looking at the helmet, the guy had a tool rack on the truck. I think I bounced off the hood and the windshield and hit my head on the tool rack. There's a big old round indentation in the back of my helmet. Always wear a helmet. Helmet has saved my life many times, and this is one of them. So next thing I remember, I'm looking at my bike going, what happened? I couldn't remember anything, nothing at all. I had no idea. If you know that area, there's some big rocks on the side of the road, and I said, I must have gone off and hit, because both my wheels, I have carbon wheels on my bike, so they're very strong, very light, but very strong, really hard to break. And they were both shattered, and I'm like, I must have rode off the road and into those big rocks. And that's the only, I had absolutely no memory of what happened, nothing. So I call my wife up because obviously I can't ride my bike because both wheels are shattered. And I tell her, I say to her, I have no idea what happened, but both my wheels are shattered and I need a ride. She goes, well, I'll come pick you up. Where are you? I said, I don't know. And it's a route that I do, trust me, a couple times a week, you know. So I had to pull out, you know, my Strava, look at the map and tell her where I was. So she came out, picked me up, asked me if I wanted to go to the hospital. And unfortunately, I've spent some time in the hospital lately, and I don't want to go back unless I absolutely have to. So I told her not to take me there. And in retrospect, that was a mistake for sure. I should have had her, gotten checked out. I got a fairly good concussion, and I should have had that checked out. And the other thing I didn't do is I didn't call 911. And the reason why I didn't do that is because I had no idea what happened. It wasn't until the next day that bang, it popped back in my head. I remember looking back, seeing a tan Isuzu pup with black mirrors and the rack on the top. Okay. And it's so strange because I didn't even remember any of it until the next day. So I try to call it the cops to report it and tell them, you know, exactly what you just heard. And they basically said, we're not going to investigate that. I mean, they said there's probably, you know, hundreds of those Isuzu pups in Sonoma County. Honestly, I'll bet you there's 5 or 6 at the most. But they were just, you don't have enough information. You know, we're not bothering with that. So, you know, moral of the story is get yourself checked out of the hospital. And, you know, I think the cameras, I got to get a camera. I still don't have one, but I've been telling myself ever since this happened, I got to get a camera, you know, because you never know why this person hit me. I mean, I'm assuming distracted driving because the only other possibility is they did it on purpose. I really don't want to believe that, you know, but distracted driving is very common. So, yeah, I think that's what happened. But, you know, I wish I would have called the cops, but what would I have told them? You know, I didn't have any info. So, you know, call the cops, get yourself checked out. That's what I learned from this. But, you know, in retrospect, I don't think the cops would have, you know, they would have said, well, what do you want us to do? You know, because I didn't know what happened, you know. How did they, at that point, I didn't know a crime had been committed, you know, and in retrospect, unfortunately, I remember the next day and it was too late.
No.
That's
Thank
it.
you for sharing that, Doug. You know, I don't know if you remember this because I don't know how long your, you know, sort of memory was impaired after the collision, but you called me maybe about a week afterwards. And I actually did talk to some folks at the CHP after that. But one of the things that had happened was that in between when the incident happened and then when we were talking about it later, there had been quite heavy rain. So something that if law enforcement had come to the scene and seen anything broken glass from the car windshield or any, you know, if there'd been any physical evidence on the street that would have, you know, would have been gone if they'd gone down after the fact. But it was this whole story that really just stuck with me after Doug had called me. And, you know, saying, well, what can I do to see how we can get that that person and hold them accountable? That made me start thinking about, along with some other calls that I've gotten about, okay, we need to make sure that everybody thinks ahead about what we should do, not just if we're hit, but if we're with someone else's hit, or we're the person who comes to get them, or we see something else happen when we're just a passerby. So I'm going to share my screen. And oops, let me get the right thing up first. Okay. Okay. All right. Now you all see in my screen yellow letters on black. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit, as I said before, about what are things that we can do that will help our outcomes be better, both from the medical, legal, and financial standpoint. And I think I already mentioned that the more we have followed any of the rules about, riding on the right side and wearing, things that are visible and having lights and all that stuff will help us with the legal sorts of things. Before we head out, there are some things that are good to do both each time we ride, and some things to have just thought about as a more overarching thing. One of them is, if you ride alone frequently, like Doug was doing, or like I do, almost all of my riding is done alone, is to let someone else know where you're going. Right? Have someone else know, at least a general sense of your planned itinerary and about when you might be home, so that someone will know if you aren't home that it's time to, figure out what's going on. I generally, when I go out, tell my wife, like, okay, I think I'll be home, by 11:30, but don't get worried until 12 in case I, am slower or stop for lunch or something. But letting someone else know where you're going and when you might be back can be helpful if something does go wrong. Wearing some kind of identification is really useful, so that if you do go down, somebody knows who you are. And most of these things, you can also put on there the name and phone number of your emergency contact person, your spouse or friend or a family member, whoever you would want to be called. They come in different formats. There's, ones that you wear like a dog tag. There's the wristbands. I will share with you links to a couple of different places where you can get them. Crash Tag is a local company that makes the kind of dog tag style. Road ID is a well-known national company that makes a variety of different, kinds of ID things. But that is helpful if you go down and somebody, finds you or tries to help you and has no idea who you are. It's also good to have the information about your contact person in some other written form in with your stuff. We can't always count on stuff that's just in our phone. What if your phone, gets smashed up when you crash? I was on a group ride once, and one of the riders got hit by a car. And as the person with the most medical training, I was the one who went in to, assess her. And she got in the ambulance and left, and nobody knew who she, who they should call to let them know that she was gone. Luckily, she was conscious. She had her phone. She was able to call. But when you're riding with people, it's also good to share that information with each other to find out, do I have, your spouse's numbers in my phone or written down somewhere. So if something happens to you, I know how to call them. Also, if you have any kind of medical condition or issue that would be helpful for medical folks to know if you did end up in the hospital, you can put that on these as well. Or there's also specific tags for these things, like if you're diabetic or a pacemaker or whatever, there's other ways that you can have that on you as well. Other things that are handy to carry with or think about, have something to write with and write on. Again, phone may not work, but if you end up in some kind of crash or incident, you may be needing to get, the phone number of the other party. And if all you have is a broken phone, that's not going to work very well. I also always carry a first aid kit. This is a photo of the first aid kit I put together for my Biker Chicks ride leaders, which is just, fits in a baggie. And at some point later, I'm always happy to talk about what would be the things you should bring. But I also really, really encourage folks to get first aid and CPR training, not just those of us who were cyclists, but everybody, because right, that's who we're the first one there if something bad happens to somebody, and the more of us who are trained in those things, the better. I do have, however, as you see in there, that little card with first aid. I have a little cheat sheet that I gave my leaders after I did a short first aid class for them, and I have that in the handout that I'll send you all afterwards later, as well as all this other stuff that we're talking about today. But I just keep a little golf pencil and some paper in my little baggy first aid kit. Some other things to think about ahead of time from the financial point of view is check your insurance. And is it going to cover anything that could happen to you out on the road? I had put a query out on Chatty to see what kind of experiences people had had with different insurance things. And in some cases, folks reported that their homeowners or car insurance covered the cost of replacing their bike that was damaged in a crash or stolen, but it's not true of all of them. We actually called my insurance, my wife and I called our insurance company, and they won't, our policies don't cover my e-bike. So I have to decide, is my bike expensive enough? Is the cost benefit of, do I want to buy separate insurance to cover my bike getting damaged or stolen, or just eat it if that happens? So that's, an individual decision depending on, how expensive your bike is, and what kind of, insurance stuff you have and whatever. But that's something to just think about and notice ahead of time. The other thing is, and Doug mentioned it, is about the cameras. I will also add rear view mirrors. I always ride with a big ass rear view mirror on my helmet, so that one just helps me see what's coming up behind me. But I do ride with the cyclic video cameras front and back, and that's something folks might consider. That's obviously not going to keep us from getting into a crash, but it gives us some evidence if something does happen. And this leads me to another person whose story I would like to see. Jake, are you here? Okay, I am not hearing him pipe up. Let me look in the participant list. Jake Bayless, are you here? Okay, apparently he did not make it. So I'll tell you his story. Let me get rid of that list. So what happened to Jake is that he was out riding with his son and I think some other folks in Forestville, and a driver came around the curve really fast. And given the road is narrow and there's not a specific bike lane, they're taking up space on the road. And this guy was coming really fast and is honking for a really long time. So clearly he saw Jake and, and the other riders. And then as he tried to pass, he hit Jake from behind. And Jake went down, no broken bones, but he was pretty banged up. And he did pursue criminal charges against the driver. And Jake was really pushing with the DA for a jury trial, but it's the judge who gets to decide, right, whether the judge is going to make a ruling or it's going to go to a jury or whatever. And so the judge did sentence the perpetrator to some community service and anger management classes, and he had to pay restitution to Jake for the damage to the bike and the medical bills and all of that. So it wasn't maybe as good of an outcome as we might have wanted in terms of holding that driver accountable. But I believe that if Jake had not had that video evidence, that it wouldn't even have gotten that far at all. Because I don't know about you, but a lot of the incidences that I've had or that I hear people talk about is a lot of law enforcement tends to blame the victim around the bicycling things, or not know that, where they were riding in the lane was perfectly legal when no, it wasn't the cyclist's fault. So I really think the video evidence made the difference in that case. Let me maybe stop here for a minute and see if there's any questions or comments on where we've been so far. If you have something to share or a question, you can use your little raise your hand doohickey down there on the bottom, and we can listen to somebody else's voice besides mine. Okay, I am not seeing any hands raised. Let me change my view so I can see all of your little faces and see if anybody's wildly waving at me saying that they want to talk. And I'm not seeing that either. So I will go ahead and continue. I'm going to bring my screen back up. Okay, we're all seeing this Studley couple on their bikes. Okay. So things that we can do ahead of time, right? What we should carry with us, things we should think about before we go out. So something happens, there's a crash. Someone hits you, you hit a pothole and go flying, you see somebody else in the crash. What is the first thing that you should do? Safety is always the first thing. And part of what will help you make good decisions and all that is to just slow down and breathe. I've been on scenes where where I've watched the paramedics arrive and they walk to the scene. They don't ever run. You want to calm your nervous system down. You're going to have adrenaline going. It's scary, but taking some deep breaths and slowing down your heart rate and calming your nervous system down will help you make better decisions. So stay calm and stay safe. Get into a safe place if you need to. If you're smack in the middle of the road where someone's, going to come hit you, then, clearly you need to move out of the way and call 911. Just like, we learned from hearing Doug's story, is you need to get that documentation right as soon as possible, right? So you want to make sure that when paramedic, when an ambulance arrives, when the police arrive, you want, you need this documentation. That's how anything afterward is ever going to progress. Because if something doesn't get documented, it didn't happen, right? Trying to convince your insurance company or an attorney or someone else about something happening is way harder after the fact when you don't have the fresh stuff in front of you. So once that call has been made, there's information that we want to get right away. And again, if you're the person who's injured, right, obviously Doug's out cold. This isn't something he could do at that point in time. But if you're with someone who goes down, or if you are able to, is you want to be able to get information about the scene. You want to get the driver's name, license plate, their insurance, their driver's license. You can take pictures of things, or write them down, but you want to get that contact info. Now, obviously, a lot of the incidences where cyclists have been hit and runs. But at the very least, if you've got the camera on your bike, you will have gotten at least a picture of the vehicle, possibly a license plate, or if you can, grab a photo with a phone, that can be helpful. If there's any other people around, any witnesses, getting their contact info, and trying to get them to stay so that they're still there when the cops get there. Again, the sooner everything can happen, the better. taking pictures of anything around you, especially if you feel like you need to move or move the bike in order to be safe. Getting a quick photo of where it was, what the condition is, get a picture of your injury, if there's skid marks from the car, as much as you are able to do is great. When law enforcement does show up, one thing people sometimes don't remember to get is contact info for the officer. Ask for their business card, get their badge number or their name, so that you then know who to contact later to get a copy of the police report. One of the things that's been frustrating for me is I've had lots of people talking about children being hit by cars while they're walking or riding to school. But most of the time when this has happened, obviously kids by themselves or with other kids, whoever hits them, stops the car and gets out and, oh, should I, call 911 or whatever, but nobody's called 911. So it hasn't been documented. And often the person who's calling me to tell me about it, either they weren't at the scene, or if they were, they don't, they say, oh, some cops were there, but and they don't know which jurisdiction, right? Okay, so this incident that happened not too far from our office here, several people called me about. No one who talked to the police or saw the incident could tell me, was it Santa Rosa PD? Was it CHP? Who was even there? Because again, you're not thinking about it ahead of time, and you're stressed out and you just see cop and you think cop. But we've got multiple jurisdictions, whether it's the sheriff, city police, or CHP. So that's something that you'll want to get. When, again, what we learned from Doug's story is go ahead and get treatment, even if you don't think you're hurt. What adrenaline does to us is it narrows our focus, right? It gets into that fight or flight thing and ramps you up, and it masks pain. So you can be far worse hurt than you think you are. So, whether it's having the EMTs just treat you right there in the hospital, whether it's taking a trip to the ER, especially if you've hit your head, if you've gone unconscious, if you've had if your helmet is dented up or whatever, you for sure need to go to the hospital. And again, all of this stuff creates a paper trail that can then help, whether you're filing an insurance claim, whether you're looking at a criminal prosecution of the person who hit you, or if you're looking at a civil lawsuit against somebody. All of that documentation stuff is going to be useful. A couple things to not do: don't apologize, argue, negotiate. Don't get into it with the driver. Get their contact info. Take a picture of their driver's license. Get their license plate number. Ask them for their phone number. They might not give it to you, but ask them for it. But don't get into stuff. Apologizing makes it sound like you're saying, oh, that was your fault. Arguing, all that does is bring everybody's adrenaline up, and that's never a good thing. Or getting into negotiating. Just get the information you need, and then don't engage anymore with them, because that generally doesn't help. That's hard to do. I know I'm hot-headed, and when something goes on, I want to go off on people. So, but it doesn't generally help. So do make sure there's a police report filed. Do accept medical treatment, because again, you're going to get documentation that this happened, and whatever injuries you have that may be worse than you think they are. Then there'll be the follow-up. What happens next, right? You're as soon as you can, at some point, write down everything you remember. What happened in as good a sequence as you can, because memories fade, memories change. We've all seen and read in the news stories where somebody's story changed later, and that makes juries not trust them or whatever. So the more you can document as soon as possible, the better. And then as other things unfold, if you find out later that your injuries are worse, you get more medical data or something else. Keep track of all of that, conversations you have with with lawyers, with insurance people, with doctors, any of that. Keep a running list of that. It's good to call your attorney. And I've heard many people recommend that you don't talk to the insurance company, especially the other party's insurance company, until you have talked to an attorney, because they'll coach you on what you should and shouldn't say to get you the best results after the incident. And then also contact whichever law enforcement agency it was, whoever, you got the number of the officer who arrived, and ask for a copy of the police report, because you'll need that for insurance and, other legal things and stuff like that. So, questions, comments, stories of incidents that you have been part of, and what you learned from them.
Can you hear me, Eris?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks. This has been super useful and interesting. I was just going to add a couple things. Clearly, the intent of this presentation, I don't think, was to talk about all the first aid and medical, implications, right? The focus was different. So, I won't go into. I won't go down, that path. But one thing I did want to bring up is I lead a lot of rides for the SRCC group. And so a lot of my experiences are in the context of group riding where there is an incident. And I've been involved in 3 or 4 of those. And I think one of the things you said really makes sense, and that is to really stay calm and have your wits about you and come up with a plan. And also especially when there's other people, because you have resources to take on different tasks. You can have one person doing the contact, you can have another person doing the road, contacting 911, you can have another person controlling the roadway situation or getting the person off the road, another person doing the medical first aid. But you just have to kind of calm down and think it through. Because it's just like you said, you get adrenaline and you're not thinking straight. I mean, for example, on a couple of incidences, we never thought to even look to see if the person had an armband on with ID info. We were sitting there asking them what their contact info was. And even though all of us wear those bands, it just never crossed our mind. Really obvious things like that sometimes in the moment you don't think about. The other really key learning that I've had is, in the majority of cases I've been involved in, many of them involve concussions, broken helmets, or heads hitting the ground kind of thing. The people go in shock, and you have to be really tough, because in many cases they think they're fine and they want to get back on their bike and continue the ride. And you may find that you literally have to forcibly tell them, no, you cannot get back on your bike, even though you think you're okay and your helmet's intact and you think your bike's okay. You cannot continue riding. And we've called 911 and the paramedics are coming. And people will fight that because they honestly think they're okay, because they're just not thinking straight because of the incident. So those were a couple of things that came to mind immediately during your presentation I wanted to share.
Thank you. Yeah, and that is, I have seen that same thing of people not believing that they're hurt, not wanting to stop. And I think if you're in a leadership role, I've done some training with some of our ride leaders, and with the Bike Coalition, and then also in some of my previous life, outdoor leadership stuff. If you're part of an organized group and you're in a position of leadership, then you do have a little bit more, kind of built-in authority to say, no, I'm not going to allow you to continue on this official group ride because of this. If it's a stranger and it's not in that setting, that can be a lot harder. I ended up treating a cyclist in Foothill. I think it was at Foothill, and a friend and I had been hiking and came back to the parking lot, and there was a guy on a mountain bike sitting on a bench looking really bad. And I, went over to start talking to him, and he was very clearly experiencing heat illness, heat exhaustion. And so we spent some time cooling him off. We could not get him to get up and move 3 feet into the shade. We kept trying to, and I'm not going to manhandle somebody. And she was big enough. I'm not sure the two of us could have dragged him over there, but my friend stood between him and the sun to put shade on him. We poured, wet handkerchiefs on him. And when he came back to being a little more functional, because that's, one of the things that happens with heat exhaustion is you lose some of your cognitive abilities. He did not want us to call 911, and I was not going to let him get back on that bike to ride home. And as we were having this conversation, another person in the parking lot who had a pickup truck said, asked him, "Where do you live?" And he wasn't that far away. And she said, let's put your bike in my truck and I will drive you home. Because, now I kind of, I ended up not calling 911, and maybe I should have. But there's always that tricky thing. I do have some really basic first aid info I can share, although I am a big proponent of folks taking classes, because one of the things, particularly in the good ones and in the farther level, you can get some hands-on experience. I've been through enough disaster scenarios that were very realistic in different settings of having to deal with a variety of different kinds of trauma and medical issues, that even if I'm not sure I exactly consciously remember everything to do, my body sort of remembers having done it. So that the first time I did have an actual incident to respond to, I pretty much did it fine. But that having some of that training and that experience and doing mock scenarios can be really, really useful. And we're lucky that we have several different trainers I know of, and this will be in the handout stuff that I will share with you after tonight. There are 3 different folks teaching first aid and safety that I know of here in the county who are all cyclists. So they already know kind of what kind of situations we're in, and they're part of our family here, and they are really good trainers. So I always highly encourage people to do that. But if you all would like, after we're kind of done with this, catching up questions and answers, I can pull up my 10-minute first aid talk if that seems like it would be useful. Any other thoughts that folks have, questions or experiences that you've been in and what you've learned from them?
Hi, this is Anna. I
Okay.
wanted to share an experience with a friend of mine.
Mhm.
She actually hit a pedestrian. She fell, and the pedestrian also fell to the ground.
Is she on a bike?
And yes, so
Okay.
my friend was cycling. Sorry, my friend is cycling. She hits a pedestrian with her bike. So I'm bringing this up, her story, in connection to your recommendation of having the information written down, your name, your phone number, everything, in a piece of paper. Because my friend, because she hit her head when she fell from her bike, and she hit the pedestrian. Of course, the pedestrian is like, "Okay, I need your information because you just hit me, and I'm gonna call my lawyer and all that stuff." And my friend gave her a phone number that ended up not being her phone number because she was so frazzled. She gave her old phone number to this person. And they eventually tracked it down because the old phone number was under her husband or her ex-husband's name. So eventually the police tracked down her through her ex-husband. And of course, then there was the accusation towards her that she did that on purpose, that she gave the wrong number because she didn't want to be held accountable. And it was because she was in that state of being frazzled. She herself got hurt, so she wasn't thinking straight. So I'm just bringing that up as an example of why it's so important to have that information written down.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I am probably over prepared for most disasters. Like my friends all joke that like, okay, when, the zombie apocalypse happens or the earthquake happens or whatever, they all hope that I'm, with them because, I carry enough everywhere I go to take care of all this stuff. But I always carry some business cards with me, not just because I'm always trying to promote the Bike Coalition, but also it's just an easy way to hand somebody your contact info. So having something that's a business card size with your info on it isn't a bad thing. I think did I see Rich's hand up earlier? Did you have something to share? Go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to thank you for this presentation, and you touched some good key points. Like you, most of my writing is solo, but when I do write in groups, I found that oftentimes there's no one in the group that has any type of first responder experience, and sometimes shockingly so. Something can happen, and people will stand there going, well, what do we do? And so it's good to have trainings like this to give people both lessons on what to do to prevent a crash, and also if a crash happens, or if a vehicle versus cyclist happens. I'm a retired first responder, and so I've been on a lot of emergency scenes, and I've seen a lot. And I'm always looking for more training too, because you can never be over prepared. But
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, another thing I always do before group trips, and this was something that was part of the culture of my sea kayaking club, because you've got more possible ways to die when you're out in the ocean, right, in a boat. And we had very much a culture of safety and a lot of training. And before we ever headed out on the water, one of the things we always did was who has a first aid kit, who has a tow rope, who has whatever training, so that everybody knew that ahead of time who had what. And I do that now, I do that when I'm out on a group bicycle ride too. If I'm not the one who's leading, as I'll say, I'm a first responder and I have a first aid kit. Who else has any first aid training, and who else has, a first aid kit, or tools, or, any other thing you might need. And yeah, often it just seems to not be as embedded in the bicycling group culture as it was, at least in my kayaking culture. But yeah, one of my favorite trainings, you kind of need to probably have had some basics first, is a company called Foster Calm that does wilderness first aid and wilderness first responder. And now she recently sold the business to a different person who's running it, but Bobby Foster, who used to teach those classes, puts together the best, most realistic scenarios I have ever done in my life. In terms of feeling realistic and people's adrenaline getting up, just like something's really going on. And I love putting together those kind of scenarios too. And I have all the makeup with the fake blood and all of that stuff too, because I'll do that sometimes for my search and rescue team is help put together scenarios. So that's something that I actually could think would be fun to put together with some of the other folks for both, join between the Bike Coalition and the cycling club or something. That could be really fun to do.